Hello and welcome. We're going to show you today our latest KDS for 2025. And it's going to be me, Martin Groschwald, and it's also going to be my colleague Ben, who will be joining us digitally out of London. So let's go into my office and let's talk about it. Come on. Hello, Ben. Thank you very much for joining me today that we can review our latest KDS together. And I think, you've obviously recently just joined us just a few months ago. So quickly for everybody, you are our head of learning. So you're really looking very deeply into the development of the car design community and on all different kinds of levels from management to skills. But I'm really looking forward to reviewing the KDS together with you. So thanks for making the time. And yeah, I think without further ado, let's just kind of get going and dive directly into the quick stats to start off with, because it's been again another big one, to be honest. So we've had into this year's KDS, we had 864 participants. I think we had a very impressive mix of people from all ages, from all seniorities, and also the representation of where they have studied in the past and where they got their degrees from has been quite impressive for us as well. So we really have the biggest universities in there over the past 20 years. And yeah, from your side, any observations as a first one that has surprised you, or was it exactly what you expected as your first KDS?
Yeah, well, I think we reached a great number with 864 designers from juniors right through to SVPs. I guess first, a huge thank you to everyone that contributed. It's global, it's anonymous. We've done our best to surface the signals for what really matter in careers and culture and capability development across design studios. Predominantly, we're seeing professionals from 25 to 44 years of age. The gender split does remain skewed towards men. A little bit more on that topic later in the presentation, but I think we've got a really good spread and a very international remit here.
Yeah, much agreed. And you mentioned obviously in some of these topics we will dive a little bit more into detail, but we wanted to actually start off the conversation with kind of the three biggest takeaways that we found in this year's study. And if we're just jumping into them very, very briefly and then go a little bit more detailed later. So the big three topics were still AI. That's still something that has come across. We called it Lost in Administration, and a little bit of a nod to the Lost in Translation movie, of course, from 20 years ago, and also the brain drain. So, just to kind of sum it up quickly from your perspective, Ben, what's the big thing about AI? What have you seen?
Yeah, so I mean, let's be clear. AI, as it says here, has firmly arrived. Current use cases that we're seeing, image generation, chat interfaces, they're still early stage, but they're really gaining pace. I think the real opportunity, we all agree, is ahead of us. Studios are starting to invest in AI literacy now, and they're going to reap the benefits. They're going to see faster concept development, deeper user insights, more, let's say, efficient iteration loops as well. It's not about novelty anymore. It's really about capability. It's not optional, it's essential.
Yeah, yeah, and I think in accordance to that is we do of course see a little bit of a question mark still on how to use it and what phases to use it, from a little bit outside the KDS as well. But it really like brings us to this kind of lost in administration, especially on the higher levels. We're seeing fewer and fewer involvement in the creative bits. We're obviously seeing this also structurally that the positions change quite heavily, especially on the management side as well. But we do believe that there is a not necessarily just a worry, but definitely something we need to be careful about in the industry, that our top level management does not lose the creative impact on this as well. Because if that gap becomes too big, or we're creating a vacuum through that as well, then the role of creativity within the entire organization, within the OEM, can be challenged quite hefty, quite a lot. So we will need to look a little bit into that as well, but it's definitely one of those takeaways. And then I think the brain drain, and we'll come to that a little bit later. But we had a lot of conversations up front about this. The brain drain is probably a big one.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that's what we're calling the happiness. The happiness paradox, right? 70% of designers say, and we'll look into this in a bit more detail later, say that they're happy. But there's movement there as well. It tells us a story. It tells us that satisfaction isn't fulfillment, growth, leadership, flexibility. That's what's keeping people engaged. And just to touch on the lost in administration as well. Yeah, creativity is under pressure. Admin tasks are eating into design time, particularly at leadership level. Again, we'll explore this in more detail later. Maybe it's not a scheduling issue. Maybe it's a cultural one. Maybe studios need to protect creative time, or see burnout, see declining quality, and disengaged teams. So there's answers to these things, but these are the main takeaways that we're seeing.
Yeah, and before we get into those, of course, we will jump into what most people have been kind of looking for and kind of always want to know first from us when we do these kind of studies. So let's jump into the money topic, yeah, because obviously it has turned out into a salary guide over the past 5 years now that we have done this. And if we're jumping quickly into the salary topics over here, what I want to say up front, of course, this is an average number. This is an average number throughout the entire global design industry. So it might not just represent your exact country and where you're in right now, but it shows once again that we are seeing that the creative design industry on all different levels, no matter if you're a designer, if you're a modeler, a visualization artist, all these levels are in pretty much every country that we can see an above average and way above average job and a profession that's being done over here. Also for entry levels globally, the starting salaries are still very, very good. Of course, you can see in specific countries a little bit where there's differences, but in general over here, with the pure numbers, we're seeing above average salaries, that it still makes a lot of sense to jump into that industry. However, of course, we need to say that it's becoming more and more competitive as well. So high salaries doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be hundreds and hundreds of jobs. We're seeing fewer jobs coming available, but they are representing the salaries, of course, accordingly as well. So we haven't really seen a lot of changes between the salaries over the past 1 2 years. So it's been relatively stable and stable on a higher level. As well, which is really, I think, from our perspective, very very good to see. And despite these challenges within the industry, we don't see any kind of big dips in it, which is promising, but also, of course, it keeps the pressure up to the job well.
Yep, couldn't agree more.
And in combination with that is, of course, the increases when we're reaching the next level, and we're seeing still the biggest one is to the highest level. Yeah, it's that role is changing so drastically at the moment as well, and with the responsibilities as well. But apart from that, we have a relatively consistent growth of salaries as well. So if you are moving into the next career ladder, it is remunerated accordingly, which I think is the key takeaway that we're having on the salary side.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd probably just add here as well, what this highlights is that, businesses see design leadership as high impact. And it also means that these roles are shifting away from hands-on work into more strategy, more politics, and more pressure as well. And it's reflected in the numbers we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we're moving onwards, what we're seeing, of course, as well, just the bonus structure. The higher you get, your salary becomes more relevant on the bonus. And on an average level nowadays, we're seeing about a 40% bonus structure. So to make the to make the calculation easy, if you would make 100 grand, you have a bonus structure of another 40 grand roughly coming on top of that as well. So there are, of course, companies that pay more. Some companies pay less as well, but on the average side, I think it's still a very very good kind of direction. Interestingly, on the no leadership and lower middle management, we're almost on the same bonus structures there, so not too much of a difference there. But of course, the basic salary has a relatively high difference over there as well. So bonus wise, not too many changes in comparison to the last a couple of years either. But again, the very good news that it's a stable direction that we're going here. All right. Well, then one of the things that we have started doing 5 years ago, and we're kind of observing, more and more and more, we are continuing to see that the companies that we would probably call startups, and we started calling them companies founded after 2010, are still significantly paying more. We're talking about 23% here at the moment, so almost a quarter more than the established manufacturers and design studios over here. The most interesting message I find on this one, Ben, is really for me that it hasn't adapted to the same level as the OEMs in the traditional base, or vice versa. That we're still seeing this quite large gap to attract the talent when it comes to startups or newer-ish companies. So it shows a little bit as well that maybe they haven't yet arrived, especially in the global scale, that it's still required to pay more because not everything is as organized or as planned as in the traditional OEMs. And my expectation would have been that by now we're maybe on a 10% difference. So 23, it's like a quarter, is still a lot in that sense. So there's probably still quite a bit of work to do that people want to go to these newer companies based on other things rather than just the money.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think we're all seeing in the industry new design studios popping up in Europe from other international brands and younger businesses, as you mentioned. They're growing fast, moving into Europe and the US, and using salary as a clear competitive edge. In the war for the best talent.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And it's going to be really, really interesting for us to see how this is going to continue in the next 2, 3 years. If we will see an adaptation that goes closer to zero or like a single digit number. And that's, I'm very excited to see that in the next few years from that perspective. Now, something that obviously, Ben, you are very, very keen on. You're, of course, our head of learning, but your background is also in HR. And when we included those questions into the questionnaire, you were very much, yeah, this is exactly what we should ask and like what we should try to find out. So, why don't you lead us with your experience a little bit through the benefits that employees are now expecting? Of course, but also what is the desirable things behind it? What were your observations, and also what maybe surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear it's not just about the money. It does remain a very big topic, but flexible work, sabbaticals, mental health support, education budgets, they've become baseline expectations for design studio employees. It's no longer enough to pay well. Studios are expected to care as well. And the best ones, they're using benefits to shape their culture and not just compensate. Um, I think I think designers increasingly are seeing learning access as a core benefit, simply just like a MacBook or an Adobe license. Um, you know, I think long-term personal development is really at the forefront, particularly of our younger generations in design studios.
Yeah, and it's obviously, I think, what we see as essentials now when we look into like the perks, but in increasingly also the retirement or the insurance. In some countries this is a normal thing. In some other countries this is an add-on in that sense. But I think they're almost non-negotiable nowadays. I would be very surprised if any of the large operations that we are aware of would have those as an if, or like a potential negotiation. And also, obviously, fundamentally, the wish for development. Yeah, and that's really for me like the key point. It's been on there, I think, from what we have observed over the past few years, for quite some time. This wish, and we still see a massive discrepancy on what is offered, and we'll come to that in a little bit, of course. But also that it's the desire to then stay into the company, because I think what we call desirable here is also a big point for people to stay within a company, to develop within a company as well, and what makes them from a satisfied employee to a very satisfied employee. And we'll come to those numbers in a little bit, of course, as well. And it's, I think, for me, the interesting thing, it's not necessarily anything that costs a lot of money, but has a massive impact. So there's the question of why is it not being done by the OEMs?
Exactly, exactly. I mean, it's easier and easier to track ROI on development for your people. So it's definitely a topic we're seeing this year.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and obviously, stuff, something that we always bring in every single year, and unfortunately, it's not getting much smaller every year. So we can only, really preach to the HR teams, to the people within the OEMs as well. We are once again seeing a gender pay gap. Yeah, this year we've seen a 30% pay gap that women earn less than men. Yes, there are probably some explanations of why this is the case and why it could have a certain kind of number to it as well, but it's a number that we think is obviously too high. Yeah, and we have to go as close as zero as possible. But it's still kind of sad to see that we're still on a pay gap overall.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the design industry talks a lot about um, inclusion. And yeah, it's a hot button topic right now in our geopolitical landscape. But the sentiment I find in design remains largely the same, regardless of which way political winds blow. We know it's a lever for performance and innovation. It's not. It's more than just doing the right thing.
Yeah, and if we are very quickly staying on the gender topic, Ben, let's look a little bit into the diversification of how it looks within the teams, and in particular over here within the creative teams. I think that we're going to focus on in the quick recording here. So we're on the interior side, we're having 90% are male, 10% are female. 94 to 6 on the exterior, which is a massive ratio in that sense. CMF, of course, not very much surprising, but in terms of the diversification, over 20% male and roughly 80% female. And on the digital sector, that is something that kind of worried me a little bit, is that we have a very, very strong male presence in the digital side, because I was hoping actually for a much more even distribution over there. And as much so also on the brand, because they are not traditionally car in that context anymore. There's a lot of people that are coming in from other areas, in tech or in fintech or whatever it might be. But it's still extremely, extremely male heavy, what we're having over here.
Yeah, I mean, from my side, no major surprises in the fact that there is a gulf, but the size of the gulf between what was the surprise. I mean, CMF is far more gender balanced, I suppose, than exterior or digital. But this tells us that hiring biases aren't just about fairness; it's about where we're looking for talent, how we're talking about career paths across different disciplines as well.
Yeah, and I think we also need to, talk quickly about the elephant in the room. Of course, this is, an easy statistic to show, but it goes very deep. Yeah, this starts within the university systems, where we just, also naturally, probably because of the topic of that it is car design or it is mobility design, probably have more male people like studying it as well, and this kind of, evening out that we're getting closer and closer to. I wouldn't even say 50%, but maybe 70-30 on many is would already be a big move. Needs to start on those levels, needs to start on earlier, school levels, for example, as well. So we have a lot of work to do, and quite frankly, I don't expect too much change in the next 5 to 10 years on this, because it is really, grassroots that we have to go into from that as well, and that will simply take time. So we obviously are aware of it, but we also have to give it the time, and we can only hope that the manufacturers are starting in those early stages with it. Going away from the skills in that sense, looking into the management levels in that sense, and here we see obviously a massive, a massive statement. It's going from 80-20 in terms of the gender distribution to about 90-10 almost in the top level management, and that is of course a lot in that sense, depending on how structures of some design studios are. The top level management might actually be more like, yeah, 80-20 in that context. So that depends a little bit in the direction that the structure of the companies are. But of course, it is quite sad to see that we're pretty much on 90-10 at the moment, so that the female representation on the highest levels is extremely low.
Yeah, I mean, quite unbelievably, that does represent a small uptick, but 12% of top leadership roles being held by women, that's still miles off balance, but it is progress in the right direction, no matter how small. I guess the question for studios now is, what's your pipeline? Are you building one? Are you hoping balance emerges on its own? Perhaps we need to think more intentionally about the future.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think again, it goes back also to the grassroots. It's not something that you can sort out within a year or two. I think there's something proactive that you can do right now, and change your strategy maybe a little bit, but in the long term, the grassroots topic will play a bigger role. Now, leaving the gender pay gap and the gender distribution in general, we're going to look a little bit more into what are the working hours? Are we still going crazy as things normalizing a little bit? But where are we with this? And I would like to say quite expected, yeah, in terms of those kind of numbers. But on a global scale, when we have the average contracting work hours that we've asked the people, it's about 39. So it's a normal 40-hour week that we're having, which is I think still the standard in most countries with a relatively, I would say, mundane 3 hours of overtime. So I think, of course, any kind of overtime is not great for everybody, but I think 3 hours is manageable and fits the workload for most studios actually quite nicely. What was your impression for the higher level management, Ben? Also with your experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I can say is it's not exclusive to automotive design or mobility design. It tends to be a trait for leadership as a whole cross industry. You know, by the time you're reaching senior leadership, logging 56 hours on average, and that's an average. That's 15 hours of overtime, whether that's driven by passion, by pressure, or maybe just lack of boundaries. It probably not sustainable if it's not addressed. We probably need to look from an infrastructure perspective at studios to make sure that we're striking the right balance.
Yeah, and I think, it's also the higher you go, of course, when we talk about those levels, and you work very internationally, you work with board members that might, be all around the world, you obviously do have to adapt a little bit. And if we look back a little bit on those levels, what you get paid for it as well, it doesn't necessarily mean that just for the amount of money that you get paid, you have to sell your entire day, time frame that you have per day. But the expectations, of course, are connected to the role, to the salary, and everything that goes along with that. So it's much more a choice if you want to go to that level as well, and what you can expect for that in that sense. And we talked earlier about the topic of administration, yeah, and lost in administration. So how much time of what we have seen now, our 42 hours, our 47 hours, or our 56 hours, are we actually working creatively versus administratively? And I think um, we're having an interesting direction here. We always knew that the more you go up, obviously the less you work really creatively, or the way you work creatively changes. Yeah, it might not be on the product anymore, it might be more on strategy and vision. um, but we are a bit concerned about how little a design boss, or, like, somebody in the highest level positions has time to work creatively, from our observations.
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree. I mean, this one's a standout. Senior levels, creative work dropping to just 40% of the job now. I mean, the rest, admin, planning, reporting. I mean, if we don't rebalance this, we might risk removing creativity from the very people who should be championing it. And I think that's the big takeaway here.
Yeah, and also I think, from the way I look into it, it's also we can question what maybe a structure of the future is. What is it that we want our best people to do, and how can we get the best out of them in their skill set as well. And yeah, there might be some people that are very good administratively, and let's give them that kind of time and work on the time. But is it always invested in the best possible way? I don't know. This is obviously a conversation that goes beyond what we're having at the KDS at the moment, but I think we need to ask those questions.
Yeah, for sure. And call back to one of our other first key takeaways as well at the beginning of this, the KDS showcase is, a lot of smart studios are now looking not just at how AI enables creative execution, but at workflows and low level tasks as well. And maybe that's what can tip the scales and the balance, or at least contribute to that.
Yeah, yeah. And if we are taking, that kind of ratio that we are talking now, and we look a little bit in what we call the mood barometer. Yeah. So that means for us, are people generally satisfied with the job that they're doing, in that sense? And I think, the really encouraging message as well, with given the atmosphere that in the entire automotive world is kind of going on at the moment, 70% are actually satisfied in what they're doing, which I think is a great message, for everybody, that car design in particular is still a job that a lot of most people are really enjoying on doing. And that's first and foremost a great sign. Yeah, so that it's something that is done with emotion and it's done because of the fun of it as well. And I think that's a really good direction. However, and this is where we come to our brain drain, when we dive a little bit deeper into the data, there's something really fascinating in here. And Ben, I'll leave that up to you. What we have over here. What was the really big thing for us that we saw?
So I think this just reinforces what we mentioned earlier about the happiness paradox. One of our other key takeaways, even among those who are very satisfied, more than half still expect to change jobs in the next 3 years. So what does that tell us? I guess studios can't afford to just rest on satisfaction surveys. People want growth, they want flexibility, they want momentum. That's what's important.
Yeah, and also, I mean, if we're looking into that and we're putting the number together, that means that out of, almost 80%, we have the numbers that are those 80% would be willing to move within 3 years, even though, a majority of those are actually happy with what they're doing. So we need to be aware of that. Yeah, fluctuation in companies can be good as well, but it's also, I think, not taking the current situation for granted. Just because something is great right now doesn't mean it's going to be like that in the next 12 months or the next 24 months or 36 months. And it's for me really staggering to especially see on the people that are satisfied that still 60% would be open to leave anyways, in that as well. And especially that we see this massive gap between satisfied and very satisfied, of saying that people would not want to move or have no plans on moving. Yeah. Once you're very satisfied, 4 out of 5 will say, "I will stay." No matter really what's going on. And I think that's a great statement to get your people there, and you get the team satisfaction to that as well. But we have to be very worried about the other three topics, even on the satisfied ones, that it's going to be easy for other people to just kind of pull your best people away out of your studio in that sense as well. So, really, the message from my perspective is the responsibility that goes back to the managers, to HR, to, like, the top level management becomes even more important to keep people happy, to build the studio in a certain kind of way that you can retain the best possible assets and the best possible talents within the team.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, along that, yeah, obviously, Ben, the question for us was just like, well, how can we maintain, retain the people for that as well? Now, you're obviously working a lot on the learning part with us as well, and on different levels, and we've kind of adapted a little bit to how we are working. So we have the software skills in that sense, and the management and leadership skills. So, was there any surprise that you have seen in the skills that the people want to learn? Anything that really has blown you away, or was it somewhat expected?
I mean, I think much of the industry will agree with me when I say it's not a complete surprise, but it's good to see this articulated. I mean, let's just look at them. The leading skills designers and leaders are hoping to develop. Top of the list is AI integration, and that's reflective from our global community. The levels are slightly different region to region, but by far and away, AI is leading from a technical skill perspective, followed by concept development. So end-to-end creative process, turning design ideas into concepts and new ways of working, doing so. 3D modeling and sustainable design. On the leadership side, vision, team building, clear communication. None of this should be a massive surprise, but what is striking is the consistency across the experience levels. Everyone's feeling the same capability gap, is how I'd summarize that.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely spot on here. We, especially on the leadership side, it's on the one hand what you want to learn to become that leader, but also the expectations in your leaders. And we did not see a gap whatsoever in that. So it's almost like, the stuff that you want to learn versus the expectation you have in your leaders was pretty much 1, 2, 3, 4 as we have it here. There was no really changes in that as well. And it's something for me as well, is it becomes obtainable as well. I think what we have realized from our perspective, and obviously, we do work on these courses, and we have them set up and everything, but it's not like this is something that's not out there. It's something that can be done and it can be brought to life relatively quickly. So it's going into a direction where we can say, great, now execute it now, because the wish is clearly there. um, And it's for me really interesting, to see it as well. But on the other hand, what we're also seeing is the time that is being invested by companies, or obviously how the employees see, their time available to do those kind of trainings, and that's going a little bit against that. It's I think we've seen it that it's n- not enough time is being put into the employees' development at all.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'll jump in here and just say this is pretty shocking. I mean, across across all regions, Europe, North America, Asia Pacific, the majority of designers are receiving no training days at all. Actually, behind these statistics here, we're seeing 60% in Europe, 66 in Asia, and even in North America, over 50% have 0 days allocated for learning, whether that's software or whether that's leadership. And maybe the underlining story here is time is money, but it is a misplaced belief that learning is a cost, not an investment. And that mindset shift to intentional capability building as infrastructure, not as an intervention, that's what creates the future ready studio.
Yeah, and I think what is really important, what you say over here, is this topic of infrastructure. Yeah,
Right.
so when we look back into the employee satisfaction, and we're looking into, you're still satisfied, but like, 2/3 would still willing to move despite that. And we're seeing, there's no time invested, there's no money invested, or like very little money. We can jump into that in just a second, into the development of the people. Yeah, to jump into the money, we have an average number of 654 euros that's being invested per year, in the annual, in the annual budget per person. And if you look into that, and just to give you a little bit of an idea from my personal experience, if you have somebody who's satisfied, you don't develop them, they will leave. It's going to cost you much, much more than 654 euros, or like even double or triple that, to replace that person, to bring that new person up to speed, or even if it's somebody internal, to then again train them to become a manager or the higher level position. So we really struggle to understand why the focus is currently not on that, because the return of investment on the trainings that you're bringing in is extremely high, and the time investment should really not be an excuse. I think, you can play around with that, and if you really want to keep your, again, most important assets is the people within the design studios on all levels, then we're not talking about a lot of money that's being needed to be invested over here. But the combination of the budget for the training days and the availability that's being made for people is indeed shocking.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, behind that 654 euros, just a little soundbite here for our audience. What we're seeing is in Europe, at least, juniors are allocated just a few hundred euros per year for training, and it goes up towards the more senior levels. At the very top, heads of group, chief design officers, the like, maybe their average budget is getting higher into a couple of thousand of euros. But so we're investing more at the top, but what about preparing the next wave of leaders, about building on individual contributor skill sets? That's where we think the ROI on learning is being missed. But it's also fixable.
Yeah, and I think also what comes on top of that is, like, there's still a fundamental misunderstanding, and again, it comes back to the topic of infrastructure that you've brought in, Ben. We hear this a lot in China, for example. In China, the request is that the employees study themselves. So you learn a new skill yourself, you learn a new tool yourself, you do your management training yourself. Um, that is a strategy that you can work on, of course, absolutely. But is it really a strategy that is in the interest of the company, to not just keep the people, but also, like, constantly develop them, and constantly develop them into a direction that is also developing the company overall forward? Um, and also, if we're talking about salaries, is it something that should be covered by salaries, in that context as well, if you want your own people to develop? And, if there's no guarantee, then if they put that money in, why should they? And why should they do that in their spare time, when they have families, when they have kids? It might become, absolutely important, impossible to do that. So I think, we should really try to, encourage the OEMs to do it from their own perspective, from their own wish, to develop the people, and not just ask the people to do it on their side, because it's getting more and more unlikely that people have the time or even want to do it. It also is quite helpful to sometimes just stop not thinking about work.
Yep, I couldn't agree more.
So, yeah, Ben. That was, the KDS 2025 from our perspective. It was your first one, obviously, with us, and we've had obviously the top three takeaways. But if you would have to sum it up, what's really for you personally, the key point that you would want to share?
Yeah, I think the key point is design studios are all facing the same technological wave that we're going through. We're at the precipice of or going through quite a lot of change as an industry in terms of the ways of working, the structures of our studios, and we all have to prepare for those changes and look at the skills that exist within our studios, the structures of our studios, and how we're protecting ourselves and creating that future ready studio. And I think the data tells that story truthfully.
And with that, I don't have anything really to add to that. And Ben, thanks very much for your support. As always on the KDS. And yeah, thanks for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. See you all again soon.
Cheers. Thank you very much for listening to us and sharing our results of the KDS 2025 with you. You can, of course, download the entire file on our website on the link that you will find below in the description. And if you have any questions for me, Ben, or the entire team that work on it, please do not hesitate to message us, and we're pretty sure that we can answer all of your questions. And speaking of questions, in the next coming weeks, we will announce a date where we will collect all of your questions and have a live Q&A for us to answer your specific questions on the KDS 2025. So with that, enjoy it, have a lovely day, and I'll see you soon.